My next guest is Nina Parrish. Nina has over 18 years of experience in the field of education, where she has worked as a special education teacher, education center director, speaker, and educational consultant. Nina is a co-founder and chief academic officer of Parrish Learning Zone in Virginia, and the author of The Independent Learner, Metacognitive Exercises to help K-12 students focus, self-regulate, and persevere. Nina holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Mary Washington, a teaching certification in special education from North Carolina A&T, and a master's degree in education for school counseling from Virginia Commonwealth University. Welcome to the podcast, Nina.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Dana.
Well, it's great to talk to you a little bit about your book that's recently been published and the company that you run, but we'll start out with the question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to
I love this question. I think the reason why I like this question so much is because I feel like as, if you have new teachers that are listening to your podcast, which I'm sure you do, it's really easy to listen to an experienced teacher and think that they have always had all of the knowledge and known how to do the things that they know now. But, when I started teaching, I was what we called in North Carolina, which is where I began my teaching career, a lateral entry teacher, which means that I was a psychology major. And then I graduated, and pretty much a few weeks later, I was an 8th grade special education teacher. And I did not have a teaching degree or any experience in the classroom, and education wasn't my field in college. It wasn't my major. And so as you can imagine, at first there was quite a learning curve with that. And I felt like I was really in the trenches every single day. And the school that I was working at was what we call a Title I school. And what that means is that pretty much at that school, about 100% of the students were from families who were experiencing poverty. And many of the students spoke English as their second language. And I was teaching during the day. I was the only 8th grade special education teacher. And then in the evening, several days a week, I was in a cohort where I was working on my special education teaching credentials and teaching license. So I felt like I was learning things very quickly, and I was learning things by making, mistakes and stumbling. And the good thing about that, and I would say the way that I climbed out of the trenches, as you said in your question, is that what I tried to do is show up for my students every day and be consistent and listen to them and be present. And as I was learning along with them, I still try to do this, modeled for them that I wasn't just the leader of the learning, but I was also a learner. And so I think it's really important for the teacher to be curious, and for the teacher to show that they're also a learner. And of course, in that first year, I probably made tons of mistakes, and there were things that I did wrong. But saying that, the teacher is a learner too. And sometimes we try things and they don't work out. And then we show up the next day and we try something else, and we learn from those stumbles. And it's in that way, nothing is really a mistake, because we can take that learning and we can reflect on it, and we can become better the next day. And it's continuing to show up and improve yourself as a teacher. And also, really, that's what we want our students to do as well.
And showing that vulnerability that you were learning as you went, and learning a lot from the kids as well, because you were starting in a field that you really didn't have your education in. And I know a lot of teachers are entering the field these days kind of with that emergency certification. So yeah, it's nice to hear kind of how you were able to dig yourself out and persevere. So let's talk about your book. I mentioned it's called The Independent Learner, Metacognitive Exercises to help K-12 students focus, self-regulate, and persevere. And that was published in May. So tell me about what teachers can get out of reading this. You told me in the pre-chat there are a lot of templates, and what can, is it something that they can use maybe in their PLCs for group discussion as well? So how can this serve teachers?
Definitely. I'm so excited to have the book published, and it's been something that I've worked on during these unexpectedly during these challenging COVID years. And it's informed by my experience working as a K through 12 tutor, and before that, a special education teacher. And what I started to notice is that often we told students what to learn, but we rarely taught them how to learn. And so a lot of times the students that I was seeing, they were bored, they were frustrated, they were angry, and they were having difficulty with taking charge of their own learning. And as a result of that, things weren't working out very well for them. And so, as you said, the book does have a lot of ready to use templates in it so that teachers can purchase the book and then read a little blurb about a strategy that I've differentiated each of the strategies and built the scaffolding in there so that they're ready to use with students starting in kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. For each strategy, it tells how to differentiate it. And then it has a template for the strategy that is actually like a printable template that the teacher can use directly in their classroom. And also you can go online to the publisher's solution tree and take a look at, there's even more resources there to use in your professional learning community. There's a whole discussion guide with questions so that teachers can work on it as a team, because a lot of times, we work better together as a team. So if it's something that the school is implementing, or if teachers on a grade level team are implementing these strategies, they can work together. There's discussion questions, and they can choose. Maybe they're going to try 3 new strategies from the book, and they're going to try those for a certain period of time. They would have the templates to use, and they could make sure that they were implementing those consistently within, the language arts class, the social studies class, math and science, so that students were able to consistently try the same strategies, but within the different content areas. Because the objective of the book is to make learning more accessible to students. So I noticed that the students that I was working with were a lot of times really frustrated. And the reason why was that they needed strategies for scaffolding, to make the scaffolding easier for the teacher to implement. Because of course, if you're meeting with 200 students a day, you can't make an individual lesson for each one of those students. We wish we could, but it's just not possible. To help students foster the motivation that they're going to need to keep going when things get difficult, to address trauma and teach students those emotional regulation skills that they're going to need to be able to be successful in the classroom. There's also information to help teachers teach executive functioning skills, as well as critical and creative thinking skills.
Yeah, I think that's all every teacher needs as they start off the school year. So definitely something I recommend people pick up. It's out now, and they can get that on Amazon or the Solution Tree website, correct?
Yes, that's right. It's available wherever books are sold.
Okay, great. So we talked a little bit in the pre-chat also about strategic planning and how students can design programs. This strategic planning helps students be more successful in school. So talk to me a little bit about that with the metacognition strategies.
Yes. So something that we dive right into in the first chapter of the book is discussing self-regulated learning and metacognition. And the idea behind that is that by teaching students starting in kindergarten, which I know sounds really early, but at that point, it's really modeling, the teacher modeling the strategies for the student. And then in about third grade, once they've had those strategies modeled for several years, they're ready to pick up and start practicing in a guided way the strategies on their own. And the program's designed to start in kindergarten and go through 12th grade with teaching the metacognitive strategies and helping the students to become self-regulated in their learning. And the idea is that over time, students would develop their own, by trying strategies within the different content areas, they would develop their own toolbox of strategies that worked for them. So, you know, sometimes they're going to try a strategy from the book and maybe it's not the best for them. Maybe it's just not something that helps them. And so part of being more metacognitive in their learning is that, you know, you're going to plan before you learn. And then while you're doing a certain task, you're teaching the student to monitor their learning. And part of that monitoring is deciding if the strategy is working for them. So, and then if it's not, to reflect on that and kind of start that cycle again and go back and plan again and try a different strategy. So students who have been taught to be more metacognitive are able to do that. And in the research, there's a study it's a historic study from Vanderbilt. And what they found, and I'm sure a lot of teachers will relate to this because this is what I've noticed with students too, is that low achieving students, they gave the students two different passages to read, and one was intentionally difficult and one was super easy. And so with the low achieving students that were really struggling in school, guess what? They just did the exact same thing. No matter what was in front of them, they approached it the exact same way. And so I feel like we see kids do that, are struggling, our learners who are struggling. It's like no matter what they're doing, they just always try to do the same thing, even when it's not working. And the difference between those students and the ones that were high achievers is that the high achievers, when they got the more difficult passage, they stopped and they used different strategies. So they reflected and they thought, wow, this is really challenging and I'm not understanding what I'm reading. And so I need to go back to the planning phase and sort of start over again and maybe do something different, like slow down or use a different reading strategy. And they really didn't see that in the students that were struggling. And that's why I think it's so important to teach students metacognitive skills, because it, you know, they can be taught, and then students can become the type of reflective learner that has a lot more success in not just academic environments, but as you can imagine, out in the workforce as well.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the path that most schools are going now, and having kids reflect on their own learning and self-assess, because otherwise, you know, teachers can't, you know, tailor to students' needs or, you know, make different, I would say, learning activities accessible to students if they're not aware of their own ways of learning. And as you said, that can happen already in kindergarten with modeling. But if they're used to that, if you start them out early, then, you know, it's good to work their way through that. When they're in middle school and high school, they can really be in charge of, you know, things with project-based learning, et cetera. It helps them when they're going out into the real world. So let's talk a little bit about your work with youth development. So you meet with students tutoring, and talk to me about how you work with those students outside the school.
Okay, so I meet with students for the past 12 years. I've been meeting with students for private tutoring, kindergarten through college students, and all subject areas. We actually have a whole team of fantastic teachers that work with us, and we tutor students privately, but we also partner with our local school system, as well as several social service agencies, to provide the same services to students who desperately need them but are not able to pay for them in a private setting.
Okay. And what have you maybe learned in the past 12 years that you've applied more recently, especially as we're moving out of the pandemic, and maybe shifted your teaching style or the approach that some of the teachers use in tutoring these students?
I think that what you'll notice when you read my book, and also what goes along with what you just said, is that when I was teaching in the public school system, which I did for quite a while before I started private tutoring, teachers take, and I think that this intensified during the pandemic, teachers take on a lot of responsibility for things that sometimes are completely out of our control. And we do this because we really want students to be able to do well, and we want to see our students become successful. But really what we have to do is we have to find a way to have the student take on an equal amount of the responsibility for learning. And I think the only way to do that is by teaching students how to learn, by teaching them these metacognitive and self-regulatory learning strategies. It allows them to be able to become eventually a partner in their learning. And that increases, with that, you see an increase in their motivation and their sense of agency, because instead of just being a passive recipient of facts and kind of just sitting there and being expected to absorb information, instead they are an active participant in creating what they're learning. They're taking on a leadership role in the classroom and in their own learning. And it also makes it possible for the teacher to do what we all really want to do, which is we want the student to be actively engaged. We want to be able to tailor the lesson to each student so that they feel like they're interested. But a lot of times when we have hundreds of students, the only way that it's possible, and what makes it possible to personalize and individualize, is working in a partnership with the student, where they have the knowledge of what strategies work for them, and they're bringing that to each assignment. And that makes it possible to really create that environment in the classroom that we all want, because the student is aware of those metacognitive strategies. They know how to stay motivated. They've learned ways to regulate their emotions when things get off balance. I think of it, I heard a funny analogy from a psychiatrist. His name was Judson Brewer, and he compared, I sort of feel this way sometimes, he compared our emotional regulation skills to a computer. When you have too many tabs open, sometimes as teachers and also our students, we have too many tabs open. And what happens when we have too many tabs open on our computer is that it's not able to process new information. We kind of see the cursor up there spinning and spinning, and sometimes our brains and our students' brains are just spinning and spinning. So it's really important. And I think that we ran into this even more this year during the pandemic, to teach students the strategies for emotional regulation that allow them to be able to reset, so that they're not just spinning, or they're not, melting down, but they're able to use those strategies to continue to be able to take in and process new information. And then, of course, eventually we want our students to learn critical and creative thinking skills that they can apply in the different classes or subject areas that they take in school or that they're interested in the future.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. And I think that, as we move on in the next couple of school years, students really need to be using those emotional regulation skills more and more, because they got unused to doing school if they were virtual for a school year or so. And trying to, voice their frustrations rather than giving up is important, right? Especially when it comes to technology. Like, that just gives me the image of kids, working on the computer and it's not working. And, especially with elementary kids, they just want to shut it down and put their head down, right? So
Yeah. I think I think you're so right about that. I think we noticed so much, during the past couple of years. I was meeting with tons of students on, Zoom meetings like this, or, on Google Meet or whatever the platform was that their particular school used, or, the ones that we used for tutoring. And it really became, I think, apparent to a lot of us that, when kids were at home, there was a ton of things outside of school going on this year, and a lot more stress. And so, as you said, it became a lot more apparent that students needed more of these strategies. And frankly, teachers too, all of us needed to learn right along with our students these strategies to persist and to stay motivated, and for emotional regulation, and to be able to, when something's not working out the first time, figure out how to, keep going. And a lot of times we don't feel like we have time to teach those things in school, but I argue that if we don't take the time to teach students how to learn, that really, it's time well spent, because if they don't learn those strategies, then it makes it, especially once they get to high school and they're expected to take in so much more information, it makes it so hard for them to be able to learn independently if they don't have a toolkit of strategies at their disposal to be able to process and sort through that information that's coming at them.
Let's talk a little bit about your blog, The Learning Zone. So you have several things on your website. It talks about test prep, parenting, educational blog posts. When did you start this blog, and which area, I would say, kind of is your favorite in terms of those services, test prep and parenting, and just kind of how you reach out to clients that are in need?
Well, when we talk about thinking about the way that you like to take in information and learn, I am a person who needs to write things down in order to process them. So I'm sort of a write to think person, if that makes sense. So I have always been a writer. And so as long as I have been teaching, I have been writing things down to think through them before I, go out and teach them to students. And so I decided, once I started my tutoring service, Parrish Learning Zone, I decided to start putting some of those ideas on our blog. And for a while, I wrote a blog for a local parenting magazine, Fredericksburg Parent. And then I started sending them out to, I had a blog in the Huffington Post for a while. And I currently write for Edutopia. And it's been something for me that has allowed me to form a community of teachers where we can share ideas. And so that's part of the reason why I do it, because I think as a teacher, it's really important to have that support of other teachers around you, where, just like what we're trying to get our students to do, is that I think it's so important to let your students talk in the classroom, and to to talk through their learning. So for me in my classroom and when I work with students, I think that they should be able to talk not just when they know the answer, which is what's really common in our classrooms. You know, we call on students who know the answer and the students who know the answer talk, but to talk to work through their thoughts so that everybody can talk. You're talking and you're having a conversation to process those thoughts, and talking is a part of the learning. And I think that really helps our students, especially those who might never talk, if we only let students who already knew the answer speak in class. And so similarly for me as a teacher, and I'm sure for a lot of other teachers, I feel like it's really important to share ideas and to get that feedback from other teachers, which sometimes is so hard for our students, but also for us as teachers, when something isn't working well for us, to go to one of our peers and say, hey, I tried this and it didn't work, and here's what happened. And I see that your students had a lot of success with this skill. Can you tell me what you did? Or do you have any ideas? And to have that back and forth, and a lot of times when I write articles, people will make comments and they'll say, oh, I tried this and, it worked really well. Or, I have this opinion about this thing that you wrote, and here's how I did it a little differently. And I feel like that's so valuable to have that community and to be able to bounce ideas off of each other.
Yeah, and definitely for people who have not checked out, I'll link that in the show notes. And you have links from your website to your Edutopia and your parenting blog as well. So I think as educators, we need to continue to learn and grow and reach out to people to form a community. So for those who aren't currently trying to look for others to form a community with, definitely that's a place to go to get those ideas. So we've had a great conversation today about your book and about what led you into starting the tutoring business. Out of everything we discussed today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I think that the takeaway that I want to leave teachers with is something that I struggled with and sometimes continue to struggle with, which is, as teachers, we, I'm I tend to be sort of an overachiever. And so I find myself doing so much in the classroom, too much sometimes. And if I'm the one doing all the talking and I'm the one doing all the doing, then I'm probably the one doing all the learning. And so a lot of times as teachers, we have to step back. And now that teachers have so much on their plate during these past few years, it's a really good time to do this. We have to step back and we have to let our students participate in their own learning, and we have to give them the tools and the strategies so that they know how to learn on their own, and they can implement those strategies that work best for them for the task that's in front of them.
Yeah, that's great to remember. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
So my website is parishlearningzone.com. You can also, I'm very active on Twitter because community is really important to me. And that is a place where I've found that it's really easy to chat with other educators. So you can follow me there at Parrish Learning, and I will follow you back and we can learn from each other.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much for being my guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was a pleasure having you on.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.